Well, hi, everyone. I'm sure that a lot of you know me. For those that don't, my name is Jessica Luther Rummel. I'm a local resident, community activist, and UNT scholar working to denormalize white supremacist culture in North Texas. Um, First, let me just say that I'm very sorry that I can't be with you tonight. But I do want to thank the Butts crew for asking me to speak to you all about police brutality, an enduring societal plague born directly out of our country's legacy of white supremacy and colonialism. That said, I guess I'll jump right in and get started. So, to say that the United States of America is governed by a police state is an understatement. Recent studies show that if U.S. police forces were collectively categorized as a country all their own, they would comprise the third highest military budget in the world. According to a recent study published by the National Academy of Sciences, as of August 2019, police violence became the leading cause of death for young men in the United States of America. Over the course of a lifetime, approximately 1 in every 2,000 men will be killed by police. 1 in every 1,000 Black men will be killed. According to the nonprofit group Police Violence Report, last year, 1,127 people were killed by police in the United States of America. 96% of those persons killed were shot, while the remaining 4% died as a result of tasing and other direct physical force. Also, of those 1,127 instances of police killings in 2020, 722 of those killings began with police responding to complaints of non-violent offenses or cases where no crime was even reported at all. 121 of those persons killed by police were pulled over at a traffic stop. Additionally, of those 1,127 instances of police killings in 2020, only 16 of those instances resulted in criminal charges for officers. That's less than 1% of all killings by police in 2020 that resulted in criminal action against police. Because of the intense secrecy and protections afforded to police who kill, the police violence report was only able to identify officers in 444 of the 1,127 cases from 2020. But in an analysis of those 444 cases, found that 14 of the officers who shot or killed people in 2020 had done so before. 5 of those officers had histories of multiple killings. Now, of course, we have to also address the fact that among those 1,127 people murdered by police in the United States in 2020 was Darius Tarver, a young Black UNT student who in the early morning hours following Martin Luther King Day was brutally assassinated by Denton police during a mental health crisis that was instigated by a critical head injury after a severe car crash just a few days prior. Though he was already shot once, tased twice, and barely even able to stand, the only possible threat posed to police at the time Darius was killed was a frying pan dangling in his hands. Yet Denton officer Douglas Downing executed Darius with 2 more rounds, while other officers ensured him a clear line of fire. Though these officers were called to the scene to check on Darius, not once did a single one of them ever prioritize Darius's safety, Darius's life, or Darius's humanity. This kind of brutality and violence at the hands of police here in Denton isn't new. In 2014, a street vendor named Jason Bishop was on Fry Street with friends when a Denton police officer asked him to move along. The next thing Jason knew, he was under arrest, and the last thing he remembered was arriving at the Denton jail before he woke up hours later in a cell suffering intense pain. The image here of Jason's face taken by hospital officials explains why. While Denton PD claimed that it was an accident as a result of an improperly applied leg sweep, which led to Jason face planting on a concrete floor, this explanation failed to explain how Jason ended up with multiple facial contusions, a broken nose, lip abrasions, wrist injuries, and 19 stitches. Additionally, while the incident did lead to one jailer being fired, not a single criminal charge was filed against the officers who brutalized him. More recently, in 2018, a Denton school resource officer named Eric Coulston pulled a 10-year-old autistic boy in the midst of a sensory overload episode out of a classroom cubbyhole and proceeded to terrorize this child for 2 hours, during which time the young boy was dragged across the floor, placed in various restraints, and held down by his neck for long periods of time, all of which left his body covered in bruises. Body camera footage reveals how the child, who struggled to communicate verbally, screamed in terror throughout the entire assault. Once again, no charges were ever pressed against the officer, who remains on staff, and a civil case for disability rights infringement filed on behalf of the child's family was dismissed without merit by a Denton County judge. This is obviously concerning, as evidenced by the statistics that I gave you earlier, as we know that officers who engage in violent conduct and get away with it are far more likely to become repeat offenders. But it's also important to note that police brutality can also exist in the form of inaction, as best evidenced by the story of Lermont Stowers Jones. Mont, as known by his loved ones, was a Black senior student at Denton High School with dreams of college and a career in law enforcement himself, when on November 20th, 2018, his lifeless body was discovered in the shallow, murky waters of Hickory Creek below Goatman's Bridge, a site notorious in our community for its legendary association with violent Ku Klux Klan murders and horror stories born out of this area's very real and extensively documented history of racial violence. Yet, state and county officials in charge of investigating Mont's strange and untimely death immediately dismissed the incident as an accidental drowning, while taking swift and coordinated actions to convolute all of the disturbing details surrounding the events that led to the discovery of Mont's body. Now, more than 2 years later, Mont's family is still fighting for answers, forced to conduct their own independent investigation after being told by local authorities that Mont's death simply wasn't a matter of importance. This kind of complicit inaction is just as historic as police violence itself. In early 1920, a young Black couple was passing through the UNT campus in their car when they were pelted with rocks by a mob of white male students screaming racial epithets. As 2 Denton police officers watched, these white students smashed the couple's windshield, sending broken glass inside the car, which gashed the face of the Black woman inside. Though officers witnessed this assault, local news reports stated that charges would be left pending until an investigation could be completed. There is no public record of any such investigation ever taking place, nor is there any record of any charges ever filed related to the assault. Of course, race, police brutality, and corruption have always gone hand in hand in the United States, as modern policing, particularly in the antebellum South, evolved directly out of overseer patrols and the enforcement of post-emancipation Jim Crow segregation laws. In many instances, local police departments evolved out of pre-established second-generation Ku Klux Klan orders. This is the case in Denton, Texas. During the early 1920s, Klan activity in Denton was not only directed by local authorities, it was coordinated by a network of officials across city and county lines. An incident reported in the local press during the summer of 1921 involving then Denton County Sheriff W.F. Swinney and a number of his deputies, along with a city officer named Nick Aiken, highlights how authorities directed Klan violence. So according to local press reports, these lawmen were on their way home to Denton from a Klan parade in Gainesville when they stopped just north of town in Sanger to investigate a tip received at the Klan parade about a gambling house. When the officers found the location, they go in and proceed to raid the home, where they find dozens of men of assorted races playing cards. The officers captured 8 unarmed men, 2 white and 6 black. One of the black men was shot 3 times. Though it was reported that several white men escaped arrest, subsequent reporting suggests that not all of them escaped punishment. The very next day, 6 robed and hooded Klansmen drug a man named Joe Barry out of his Denton home and into his front yard, where they tied him up, put a handkerchief in his mouth, and flogged him repeatedly for an hour with a horsewhip. A boarder who was living with Barry at the time fled out of the back of the house and ran to the city square, where he reported at the time the still ongoing attack to city officer Nick Aiken. According to the press report made the subsequent day, unfortunately, Officer Aiken was unable to help as he was just getting off duty. So he reported the ongoing assault to another officer, but unfortunately, that officer was also unavailable. So then the call was passed on to Sheriff Swinney, but Sheriff Swinney was sick and couldn't help either. After Joe Barry's assault, he never went to the police himself, and they never sought a statement from him either. There was no need to, you see, because Klan and police justice had already been served. It should be no surprise that Denton's police force was established at the same time as local Klan was established in 1920. This in mind, it should also be no surprise that both the police and the Klan in Denton were launched at the same time that local community leaders launched a campaign to forcibly remove Quakertown, a predominantly Black neighborhood and business district formerly located just northeast of the downtown square. In mid-August 1923, as the last of the Black-owned homes were being removed from Quakertown to make way for a new whites-only park, Denton's white community celebrated their forced eviction with a massive Klan parade in the city. And a dramatic show of white victory and power, more than 250 Klan persons paraded Denton's city square, and the city and county provided more than 40 special officers to manage over 20,000 onlookers. City officials, including the mayor himself, personally helped handle the crowds. All this while dozens of police officers marched alongside the Klan through the square. Surely there was no doubt then in anyone's mind who ran Denton. Cops and Klan have always gone hand in hand. 50 years later, in the spring of 1969, Black residents in Denton, predominantly students, began to demand equal rights and protections in the community. Around this time, an Afro-American student organization was formed at the North Texas State University, what is now known as UNT. And after a series of campus rallies throughout February of that year, the organization's president, James Frank Wyman, published a list of demands in the campus newspaper on behalf of 600 Black students who he argued were, quote, inflamed by their conditions and daily treatment on campus. The following April, the Afro-American Student Union, alongside the campus's Students for a Democratic Society and the Radical Caucus of Young Democrats, marched in front of the city police station to protest an officer's assault of a 17-year-old Black freshman at the university named Brad Young. According to Young's account published in the local press, he had voluntarily visited the police station per an officer's request to discuss a marijuana investigation. During questioning, a sergeant struck Young across the face so hard that he was knocked from his chair to the floor, which resulted in a significant corneal injury. Now, of course, the police chief, Wayne Autry, at the time confirmed with reporters that there was a, quote, slight altercation. But referring to Brad Young as the boy, the chief claimed there was, quote, no serious injury involved. Students felt differently, and they protested against police brutality for several days in Denton, with hundreds marching through the streets from the university to the police station. Black leaders and white allies rallied together, calling for an end to police harassment and brutality, and they demanded more police education and a civilian review board. All of this sounds strikingly familiar, does it not? The truth is that Denton has made very little progress since the civil rights era. The majority of its Black and brown residents are still largely confined to segregated areas of the city, where imaginary but commonly understood lines define the boundaries of racial division. This summer, like last, predominantly young protesters, many of whom will come from our local universities, will continue to march against police brutality here in Denton streets. Nearly 50 years later, they will demand the same changes from local authorities, while the Black, brown, and poorest, most vulnerable members of our communities of assorted races will face the most egregious violence at the hands of police again and again. We know this because the narrative is historic. So, what do we do now? Well, if you ask me, we abolish the police. We work towards abolition movements. But in the meantime, if you're looking to be a part of change and to directly contribute to justice efforts, I'll leave you today with 3 calls to action. I'd like you to visit 2 websites, justicevermont.com and djtjusticenetwork.org. Learn the stories of Lermont Stowers Jones and Darius Tarver. Get involved in their families' fights for justice. And then go to Facebook and find the Police Denton County, Texas page, a police accountability page dedicated to documenting and archiving police conduct, brutality, and abuses of authority in the Denton County area. Take the time to review the information on the page about how you can help reduce instances of police abuse and brutality in our community by putting a spotlight on injustice and denormalizing police violence. It's up to us. There's no regulating or reforming a system that was designed from the beginning to serve a few. There's no reforming a system designed to be brutal. There's no reforming a system born out of racial violence and white supremacy. Do the work. Stay loud. Take care of yourself and each other. Thank you. Take care of yourself and each other. Thank you.